And then, as we enter, we look up at this tympana with all of the archivolts and the carvings above. The archivolts are those I want to point at things, and it's very frustrating because when I'm teaching in class, I just point. You can see that in the arch there are, of course, stones that are carved with individual figures that form sort of a half circle. Of course, there's a pointed circle, the half oval, around the tympana. And those blocks are called either archivolts or voussoirs. That's the other name they use. No, I'm not going to test you on that term. But anyway, we're looking up here, and of course, just like in the Romanesque churches, you see, and it would be very naturally as a Christian church, Christ is the most important, the largest figure. He's right in the center. And beside him, or something you've seen many times before, the symbols of the four evangelists. The angel or winged man of St. Matthew. Below that is the lion, the winged lion of St. Mark. And then you have the eagle of John and the winged ox that stands for St. Luke. And you'll remember that we said that these come from the visions of God on his throne, the vision of Ezekiel, the vision of St. John the Evangelist when he was exiled to the island of Patmos in the book of Revelation, or the Apocalypse. He has a vision of God, and the four living creatures surround the throne of God, and they sing Sanctus, Sanctus, Sanctus. So, well, if you're reading the Latin Vulgate, they sing that. It would translate as Holy, Holy, Holy. So Christ is identified here as God, and the other side of the Trinity, where he shares the substance of the Father. So what you are seeing is a heavenly Christ, the image that we've seen many, many times before, the Majestas Domini, the majesty of the Lord, or Christ in majesty, Christ in glory. And in this case, and I'll explain to you why it very well may be not just we're looking up there, but it's also been called the apocalyptic Christ and the second coming. Okay, what's that all about? Well, the apocalyptic Christ, if you look at those figures in the archivolts, and you think back to Moissac, we had the same kind of iconography, actually, where you have the 24 elders of the apocalypse, who take their crowns and throw them on the crystal sea. And so those would identify it as Christ at the Apocalypse. And the Apocalypse, or the book of Revelation, tells the story of the end of the world, where all these horrible plagues come and destroy and kill all of mankind. The Last Judgment isn't part of the book of Revelation, but the idea is that this prepares the way for the Last Judgment eventually. So what we're seeing, essentially, the idea that Christ will come again at the end of time, may be part of this. Now, there's the apostles below there. What are they doing? Well, in Matthew, Christ tells his apostles that when he comes again and when he sits in judgment, they will be with him. So there they are, with two extras. The two extras are always kind of interesting. Some people think that they might be Enoch and Elijah. Enoch and Elijah are the two humans who did not die. They were taken into heaven. You're probably more familiar with Elijah and his fiery chariot that's taken up into heaven. Well, at the end of time, everyone has to die, including Enoch and Elijah, who've been spending their time presumably in heaven, and so they have to return. It's also said that these are the two witnesses that are mentioned in the book of Revelation, who are sometimes identified with Enoch and Elijah in exegesis or commentary. So, yeah, there's a lot of names we could give this. And here we're looking closer. And I wanted to point out some things about this. We said that with the Gothic sculpture, you're seeing an image that's much more naturalistic, and I think you can really see that with the image of Christ. One of the things that's fairly obvious is that the proportions are normal. Think about Vézelay. Think about a ton, and how the knees were splayed. At Vézelay, there's twisted to one side. At a ton, you've got sort of this bow-legged Christ. That everything seems to be flattened because they're using a flatter block. And this artist is using a thicker block, and the knees project forward. Instead of some tubular person who can twist and writhe into different parts of the architecture, we see pretty normal proportions. I mean, Christ looks like he's normally proportioned like another human being rather than having long, skinny legs or arms or torso or something. So he's got normal proportions. The knees and the arms actually project outward, into our space, into real physical space. And then take a look at those drapery folds. They seem to very tightly wrap the knee and bunch up. And so, although there's still certainly some love of pattern here, we're starting to see more naturalistic drapery. Now, there's one place where that pattern just takes hold, and you have these sort of swirls over the arm, which maybe aren't the raised arm that would have been blessing before it was broken off. So there are some times that the pattern breaks through, but you can see, I think, a lot more elements that are saying that this is looking more real, essentially. There, said it. Greater naturalism than the Romanesque. The knees and arms project outward, and the drapery folds, for the most part, follow the body. And we also mentioned the fact that we have normal proportions here and a structured face that seems to have bones behind it. The cheekbones are prominent. The face is really articulated. And so here you see it. This is also kind of interesting, too, because Christ, he's coming at the end, but he doesn't seem to be a wrathful Christ. He seems to be very, very human. And so you see this emphasis really on the humanity of Christ during the Gothic period. A Christ who lived as a man, who suffered as a man. And one of the things about that I think is so interesting, I think by this time, it's really, really ingrained that Christ is divine. And you think of those great majesties of the Lord in the Romanesque tympana and how perhaps, overwhelming and just amazing they seem. And here the pendulum swinging the other way is, okay, we all know he's divine. Let's remind us that he actually took on human flesh, and that was the first sacrifice. He suffered horribly when he died. This was a sacrifice that saved mankind. And so now we're seeing that emphasis on being able to identify with the human Christ. People would weep over the sorrows of Christ. And they would imagine themselves walking with Christ. Might also point out, once again, those drapery folds that around the neck, they seem to sort of bunch up and then fall more naturally. The face is really contoured. The wave of the hair, although you do have these parallel lines that certainly are pattern-like, you don't have these sort of wild curly cues. It's starting to look much more like hair.